I still can't quite believe, frankly, that our government, the British government, allowed the murderer, cold-blooded murderer of a police officer in uniform in the streets in London to get away. I still can't quite believe it.
But it got a bit serious for me during that first episode, and I realised that I was going to possibly unpack a lot of stuff that I had well packed away. You know, I had it locked in cupboards and rooms that would never be explored again. So that first Undercover Cop episode was a bit tricky. It turned out that you asking me questions and me being uncomfortable, but speaking about it and thinking about it and communicating it made it more palatable as I went on.
Yeah.
And I realised that it was in the past. We found out that Tom had a friend. And a girlfriend at that.
No, you found out that I had a friend that I was prepared to introduce to you. That's not the same thing.
Big difference.
That's not the same thing at all. It's going back 200 years, almost, in Birkenhead, and thinking, yes, that was a good job done. I can recognise that. I can be there. I can stand beside that guy and see his thought processes. But it's fine. It's like you can go along, you can go to this one and that one and the next one, and then something will happen and you'll go to a particular crime. Perhaps it's a child and it just hits you. All of a sudden, you've reached your limit and it just hits you. I got the impression that we actually heard that from Martin and heard a very personal view of the work that he'd done.
Good evening, Tom. How are you this evening?
I'm well, Simon. How are you?
Fantastic. Tom, we've got a live show this week. And what I wanted to do tonight, or what we agreed to do, was to go over season 2, because we've come to, I can't believe we're at the end of season 2 already. Can you?
I know, it just seems to have gone in a flash. And when I was looking over season 2, you know, we've covered a lot of ground, a lot of very different ground. It'll be good to have a catch-up about it and just chat it through and really speak about the highlights. Been a good season.
I was thinking that you and I will have our favourite episodes. We've never discussed it, but everyone will have their favourites. But you sometimes get surprised by people who their favourite is one that you never really considered much at all. So it'd be great to get some feedback. We must talk to our backroom team about getting some feedback and maybe let people have a say about what their favourite 2 or 3 episodes were.
Yeah, that would be a good...
Yeah, would give us a guide for the future as well, where to focus.
Indeed.
So season 2, we got off to a flyer, Tom, because we met John Murray originally, and through him, Matt Johnson, who had written the book about the Yvonne Fletcher murder in London. That first story with Matt Johnson really whet the appetite, didn't it? And it brought us back to the day that you remembered very, very well. I think it's one of those things, where were you when such and such happened? Yeah. I think that's the case with Yvonne Fletcher's murder.
It really was. I thoroughly enjoyed it. In fact, that episode was one of my highlights for the season, because I remember so vividly the death of Yvonne Fletcher and all that went after it. And to get Matt's insight into all the intrigue and all the double dealing that went on after it was very, very interesting, and an outstanding book to go with it too.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was very, very interesting. And I still can't quite believe it. Mm-hmm. I still can't quite believe, frankly, that our government, the British government, allowed the murderer, cold-blooded murderer of a police officer in uniform in the streets in London to get away. I still can't quite believe it.
It's something we'll come back to, because of other interviews that I've done this season with our American friend, Mike Bonvoltry. But yeah, our government, you expect more of them, wouldn't you?
Yes. I'm not a conspiracist, but there are some really deep unanswered questions there about just, you know, why they did not pursue that more vigorously. I fully admire, I can tell you, I admire these two for pursuing this, because they're not going to let go. And neither should they. There
was all that intrigue at government level, at global politics involved, of course, and oil and all the things that in the mix. But I thought, over the 2 episodes, the lovely part of it for me was that we got to get some insight into Yvonne herself. We got a feeling about what kind of person she was. She was tiny in stature, but she was determined to be a policewoman. and she was so well liked and loved by her colleagues. And I can imagine that she was respected in her community as well. She was a wee terrier, I think, Tom. And it was lovely to get that perspective, particularly from John Murray, who worked with her.
It was. He really coloured in the character, didn't he?
Yeah.
Of Yvonne. But she wasn't just a victim. She wasn't just somebody, you always have this picture of her hat lying in the middle of the square. That's the image I have of Yvonne Fletcher. And now I have an image of a bubbly wee girl who was full of life and a really effervescent police officer. And I'd love to have met her. Met her.
And of course, John's campaign goes on. He's had another success in the interim, and he just keeps plugging away. And as you say, nothing's going to deter him now. He made that promise to Yvonne, which he told us about on the podcast. He made that promise in the ambulance to Yvonne. And by God, he's stuck by it, hasn't he?
He really has, and much to be admired. All this business about the honours list and who should get honoured and politicians getting honoured and whatnot. I'll tell you what, he deserves to be recognised for what he's done and just the tenacity of that man to deliver justice.
Yeah. So that was our first 2 episodes. We got off to a real flyer, didn't we, back in April? And
we did.
Our third episode was a bit more uncomfortable for me. I kind of got taken by surprise by it. When you're so familiar with something, when you've done it all your life and all your career, in the lead up to it, I thought, we're going to have a chat about undercover work. And that was okay when I was talking about early days and uniform and stuff like that and getting asked to do wee drug busts here and wee turns there. But it got a bit serious for me during that first episode, and I realised that I was going to possibly unpack a lot of stuff that I had well packed away. I had it locked in cupboards and rooms that would never be explored again. So that first Undercover Cop episode was a bit tricky.
Yeah, I sensed that. When you were speaking about it. I could understand it. I mean, I never worked undercover, but I worked with enough undercover cops and supervised enough undercover operations to realise just how tricky it is and how ambivalent you were about it and the feelings of, giving away secrets and, as you say, dragging out this, not the dirty washing, but, dragging out the memories, some of them good and some of them terrible, from the past. It was enjoyable for me. I enjoyed it, but I could see that it was more of a trial for you.
Yeah. We did the 2 episodes. The first one was a trial. The second one, which I wasn't sure I wanted to do immediately after the first one, but I came to terms with it. It turned out, Tom, as we've spoke about with lots of things on here, that speaking about it was good. It turned out that you asking me questions and me being uncomfortable, but speaking about it and thinking about it and communicating it made it more palatable as I went on.
Yeah.
And I realised that it was in the past and that you can't change things. You did things 30, 40 years ago that obviously you would go back and readdress with hindsight. But you were doing the job. That's what we were doing at the time. I think I'm going to be speaking about it on Sunday at our live show. I think Jane's going to ask me something about it. And I'm in a much better place now to talk about it. Still a wee bit uncomfortable with giving stuff away. You never, ever, ever, and you'll be conscious of this very much so on here, we never, ever want to give away any tradecraft or anything like that might be of use to criminal fraternity out there.
Neither do I want to appear flippant about incidents which were very, very serious, involving the loss of life. And I never want to do that. And I'm very reluctant to talk about the details of these things. And that's very difficult. Of course, I write books. I've written books about the World's End murders, which I was involved in, which we'll talk about in a minute.
Mm-hmm.
And, I've written other books which, even though one of the crimes I wrote about happened 90 years ago, actually it still touches on living people because there are still grandchildren and extended family.
Yeah.
And I am very conscious of that. And I'm also very conscious of the fact that I was a serving police officer, as you were, and you have a duty of care and you have a duty of confidentiality. So I don't like this business of, now I've left the police, I'll just blurt it all out in some tabloid-esque fashion.
Mm-hmm.
I don't believe in that.
Yeah.
The police service was very, very, very good to me, and it deserves my loyalty still and ongoing. And I'm not going to change that.
Yeah. And that's kind of the rule that we have all the way through these things. And we do, behind the scenes, we do, I know that you and I ensure that we're not stepping on any toes or getting in anybody's way, and that's the way it should be. So the undercover stuff, we did it twice, and the second one was a bit better, I think, because of the... Part of the problem, Tom, is exactly what you said there. There's a thirst out there in the public domain for that kind of headline, for that kind of information. The television's full of it. The television, there's series of hundreds of different detective and undercover, because there is a thirst for knowledge. But really, what they want to know about is the 1% or the 2% that's exciting and captures the criminals. They really don't want to know about the 97, 98% that's about deceit and lies and being in places that nobody would really want to be. So that's part of the dilemma for us. It's like the murder. You're always very careful about the language we use on our headlines, on the names of our episodes, because we never want to glorify any of the things that we deal with, because there's nothing glorified about them.
Yeah, that's right.
So the next one, we made a fantastic discovery in our next episode. We found out that Tom had a friend. And a girlfriend at that.
No, you found out that I had a friend that I was prepared to introduce to you. That's not the same thing.
Big difference.
That's not the same thing at all.
Poor Jane. I wonder what she did to deserve that. Of course, I'm talking about Jane Hamilton, the former Daily Record crime reporter, author, successful author. We'll find all of that on Sunday, because she's going to be our hostess with the mostess on Sunday at Hillhead Library. Did you enjoy that? Because she was sitting next to you, Tom. Did you enjoy that format?
She was here in my studio. It worked very well. The funny thing is, I have known and worked with Jane for 30 years. Yes, 30 years, almost exactly. And there were things I found out about her in our interview that I hadn't known before. Now, for instance, you see, I'd always thought about Jane. I mean, sometimes we weren't friends, sometimes we were adversaries. Let's be clear. But we always had a good professional relationship, and we always got on, even though there were sometimes the last thing I wanted was a phone call from Jane Hamilton. It really was the last thing I wanted. And often there'd be things happening, and my secretary would come through, that's Jane Hamilton, the phone for you. It was a sinking feeling. And of course, sometimes it was just a routine, hi, what's happening? But of course, I always thought, oh, what she found out now, because she had an enormous web of sources, She was a very, very tough nut as a reporter. And I never really considered what sort of risks she was put to and put herself to in the pursuit of her business, because we were always in the police. And, we could call for backup. And we did call for backup. And we went team-handed. And, if we knocked on the door, you had two of the biggest guys standing behind you. She was on her own all the time. And as she so eloquently said, there was always this underlying tension and this sort of sexual threat she came across. I thought was very interesting. It was also illuminating to me that despite the fact I've known her all these years and I've professionally sparred with her all these years, that was something that I hadn't really considered, and I should have done.
It was something that brought home to me as well when she was talking, because she speaks so well about it. And I know she's a wee bit blasé because she is a tough nut, but it brought home to me all the policewomen that we've worked with over the years, that they saw the job through a different lens, Tom, because of the looks that they got, because of the language they maybe had to put up with, because they were made to feel uncomfortable at certain times. I'm not thinking of anyone in particular. I'm just thinking at looking at the world through female eyes as a policewoman or a crime reporter or any walk of life would give you an entirely different perspective on what was going on.
Yeah, and all the innuendo.
Yeah.
I mean, not just with members of the public, but also, frankly, within the police station itself.
Yeah.
And I mean, I worked with many women officers who were absolutely first class. They could all take care of themselves, I mean, in every way. Don't get me wrong, but I never thought about that. You're right. Their view of the world was just slightly different.
Yeah. There's a story I've not told you. It was a girl, Christine Alexander. That was her maiden name at the time, and she was on Group 3 at Campbelltown. And one of the lads on our shift, the lad John Malcolm, still a friend of mine, he was a joker. He would start a fight in an empty house, Tom. He was a big, big lumpy boy.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Whenever you went with him, it was calming him down was the biggest part of any incident that you went to. But he decided one night that he was going to scare Christine, because we're in the county, remember, and on the night shift, one of you's got to be bar officer. One of you has to get left behind to answer the phone, etc. So Christine was in the bar on her own in a big police station. It's an old castle. It's on Castle Hill. Mm-hmm. So it's an old haunted building. It's still there, but it's not a police station anymore. So John puts on a mask. I think it must have been near Halloween time. And John put on a really very realistic mask, a horrible mask of an old man with the hair and all the rest of it. And he crept around the building and he was scratching the windows and maybe tapping the windows and going round the building to get her attention. And he got her attention. And he was at the back door and he was scratching on the back door when it suddenly flew open and she hit him over the head with a stick. She didn't know who it was. She didn't care who it was. He was getting hit with a stick. They only had the wee sticks in those days as well, remember?
Yeah.
And John had a big lump in his head. He's screaming, "It's me, it's me." I'm not sure if she hit him once. She maybe hit him another time just for luck as well.
I think he deserved it. Well done, huh?
Yeah, brilliant.
Well done, huh?
I would love to get her on, and she's agreed to come on and chat to us, but she's so busy travelling the world now. She's in New Zealand, she's on a cruise, she's on this, she's on that. So that was Jane Hamilton. And as I say, Jane is going to help us out on Sunday. She'll keep us in line. I think she's going to referee. Is that the thought?
No. Facilitate. I think the word you're looking for is facilitate. Actually, Jane's got a lot more to give. Jane's got a lot more to say, and she's got interesting perspectives about the whole thing. And I think we'll have Jane back as a guest on many occasions in the future.
Yes.
She's very good, and as I say, she just got a slightly different view, although she has a very, very good knowledge of the criminal justice system, but just from a slightly different perspective.
Yeah. We'll definitely have her back on because she's the only friend you'll introduce us to, remember?
No, not necessarily. I've just got to see how I don't want to lose my friends, and so I'm very, very choosy about when I would introduce them.
I can understand how precious they must be to you.
Well, you're judged by the company you keep, Simon, and that's what worries me a bit.
Brilliant. So Jane Hamilton, and then we came on to, we've gone through cases like this over the piece, Tom, that you've written about and that you've studied. You've done cold case reviews of, and this was one of the biggest ones. It was the Westport murder, part 1 and 2. And I know it's a real topic of yours. You love the historical value of it and all the early days. It was 1828, of course, when Lothian and Borders was in its infancy. It was only 20 years old. And I know you love all that. Do you take a personal satisfaction from those cold cases, looking at the old papers? We've never really spoke about that. How do you feel? I was going to say, do the hairs stand up in the back of your neck? Because that's how I feel about it.
Oh, I love it. I love looking at these old cases. I mean, when I left the police, I did quite a number of cold case reviews and domestic homicide reviews down in the north of England. And I found them fascinating because you dig out the old files and you start looking through them and you spot little things. And you've got very limited information to go on, particularly photographs. And you begin to, and this is not the case with Burke and Hare, of course, because there were no photographs in 1828, but for cases that are just less than that, the Ruxton case, which we'll talk about in a minute, you've got these black and white photographs. And now we are so used to images on our laptops and on our mobile phones that we skim over them. But in these days, images were very scarce, so you see these black and white pictures and you really pay close attention to them. Actually, what's going on, particularly crime scene photographs. And the more you look at them, the more you see. So I think it's fantastic. The Burke and Hare murders really interest me in a number of ways because it's been, first of all, it's been so badly represented, generally speaking. There's been some very good books written about it, but also, frankly, a load of nonsense as well. Factually, completely inaccurate. And actually, when you look at these crimes, they were much more important than just simply gruesome murders. And so they deserve much more than the what I call the Halloween treatment. They deserve careful analysis because actually, when you look at the Westport murders and all that came from them, like changes in the law, the testing of the new policing system, as you say, Edinburgh City Police was formed in 1805, so it was a very new organisation, still to prove itself. There was so much came from that particular set of crimes, the Westport murders, that actually defined how we live today. Public health, slum clearance, licensing registration, the Anatomy Act, and on it goes. So I love to look at these cases and I love to look at the turning points. I thoroughly enjoy looking at the work of these old detectives, going back 90 years in the Ruxton case, going back 200 years almost in Burke and Hare, and thinking, yes, that was a good job done. I can recognise that. I can be there. I can stand beside that guy and see his thought processes. I thoroughly enjoy that. And I thoroughly enjoy bringing it to life, Simon, and drawing these people out from the shadows and describing them and describing their work and talking about them and writing about them. And as I say, bringing them back to life. Enjoy that.
You're very good at it, Tom. There's people that you've brought to life, like Sergeant Sloan in the Ruxton case, and you use phrases that just, as soon as you say he was an ex-Scots Guard, that's it. You know who he is. You know where he's coming from, and that no way was he going to be repulsed in any way. There was nothing. It was like my old sergeant sending me to a post-mortem and saying, you'll never be squeamish about anything if you can stand through a post-mortem. And he was absolutely right. And Sergeant Sloan fell into that category. And all of those guys of that era who had been in the front, they'd been in the trenches, literally. So there was a different mentality brought to the thing. There was a different outlook, professionalism and stature. And you bring all that to life. Brilliant. But we'll talk about Ruxton a wee bit more in a minute or two.
Yeah. Coming back to this, I always think that the generation, our parents' generation that lived through the Second World War, were a very, very tough, resolute group of people. But I think the generation before that, who lived through the First World War, were even tougher. And they had to be even tougher. And these people who had spent 3 or 4 years at the front line on the Western Front fighting these trenches, they have a toughness which we can't even begin to imagine.
Even on medical grounds, Tom, when you think of how rudimentary things were then, and there was no benefit system. We hadn't yet created the NHS and a benefit system. We can't imagine what life must have been like then. And the fact that we're here at all is testament to the job that they did in getting through it. So after the Westport murders, we had and this was a flip. I'd like to get feedback on this kind of thing because it was a flip for us. It was a first. We got a scenes of crime officer in. Because scenes of crime examination is something from Ruxton forward. We speak about it in almost every case that we talk about because it's a rudimentary part of investigative work. But we got Martin Lupton in, who had been with Strathclyde Police. He talked to us about a couple of murders that he'd been involved in. Did you think that was a worthwhile exercise? Did you enjoy it?
I did very much. And once again, like Jane Hamilton, I learned something because, I've been at dozens and dozens of scenes of serious crime over my time. But the difference is that the SOCOs, scenes of crime officers, have to get right down in there and focus their cameras and stay there and take not one, it's not a case of looking like we looked, it's a case of getting right down in there and you're almost personally involved in it. And that struck me. And I've got a good friend who I fish with who was a scenes of crime and photography and fingerprints and recovery of evidence. And I said that to him. And he said, oh yeah, he said, it's a completely different thing. He says, we used to look at you guys, your SIOs and your deputy SIOs, and you'd come in your suits and you'd look and you'd say, let's do this and let's do that and let's do that thing. But at the end of the day, it was us in the protective suits that were right there, inches away from whatever it was that we're looking at, taking photograph after photograph after photograph. And then, of course, in the old system, they had to go back and they had to develop these photographs. So they were right in it. Again, it's like we were talking about with Jane Hamilton, just a slightly different viewpoint, different perspective. I can understand, too, why it made such an impact on Martin. And Martin said himself that he was scarred by his experiences. It affected him very, very badly. And particularly with certain crimes. And it's fine, it's like you can go along, you can go to this one and that one and the next one, and then something will happen and you'll go to a particular crime. Perhaps it's a child and it just hits you. All of a sudden, you've reached your limit and it just hits you. I got the impression that we actually heard that from Martin and heard a very personal view of the work that he'd done. And so I enjoyed it and I learned something.
There's a great question you asked and you just slipped into your SIO mode. Do you remember what I'm talking about?
I can't actually, no.
There was hairs found. He was talking about the trial and there was hairs found of the accused on a bush very close to where the girl's body was found. And you immediately said, was it found beforehand or afterward? And that was your and it was great because he immediately said it was in the photographs that I took on the night. You could see the hair. And it shows you that it was in the photographs, but it hadn't been noticed. So the photograph is a very important capture of a time, isn't it? We used to always be very careful about getting those photographs in the can so that we had the time capsule of those photographs. So it didn't matter if somebody moved something, which could happen too easily at a locus. We had the photographs to remind us of how things were.
And as I said about the historic cases I've done, you look at these photographs and the more you look at them, the more you examine them, then the more you find out. And it's amazing, after many, many years, you can still see things. And that, of course, is why it's important that they are of the highest quality. And this is where the likes of Martin is absolutely essential, because the professionalism and the quality with which he took these photographs is all important, because there's only one chance. You get one chance, because that locus is never going to be there again. Once the body's moved, then everything changes. You've got one chance.
Did I ever tell you about a fire that I went to take photographs of, Tom? It turned out to be a fire raising. It turned out to be a High Court case, in fact. Did I ever tell you about it? No?
No, don't think so, no.
I think my wife was away with the kids, away to visit her parents or whatever it was, and I was working. And I'd gone out at night and I went to play darts, I think, or pool or whatever. And I ended up worse for wear, right? And I remember phoning the night shift to come and get me, to take me home, which they did, thankfully, because I was meant to be in the High Court in Paisley in the morning, separate thing entirely. I felt as though I got home and I felt as though my head had just hit the pillow when the phone went. And there had been this fire and I was asked to come and take photographs. Obviously, I had to get a lift there. And I went and I took all these photographs. I'm going to save the other side of the story, how the arrest was made, because it's an interesting story. I'll save it maybe for future reference. But the bit I was going to tell you was that I went, and you knew the fire service in these rural county offices. We knew all the firemen. You knew the fire chief and all that. You'd have a pint with them. And they were all laughing and joking about the state of me with my suit and my tie and whatnot, taking photos in this house that was gutted. It was gutted. It was a tenement flat, top flat, gutted. And a family of 3 had just escaped from it in the nick of time. In those days, I had to send them all up to Dumbarton to get processed and get developed. And I got a phone call the next day on my way back from Paisley to tell me that there was nothing on the film. I never took off the lens cap. So busy laughing and joking with the fire service, I never took the lens cap off. And as you say, you get one shot at it. You know, it's gone the next day.
Thankfully, that was a fire raising and you got there in the end. But if that had been a scene of another crime, then we would have
been... yeah. I wouldn't be telling the story
now. No, indeed.
Did you do scenes of crime, Tom? Did you ever do scenes of crime in any of your postings as a detective?
No, not really. I was a city cop from the start, so I didn't. No, I didn't. We were very, very lucky in Edinburgh in that we had a very, very good scenes of crime set up. And that was a legacy of the Ruxin case, actually. Going back way before my time. That was a legacy of the Ruxin case. So we always had a very good scenes of crime. And particularly the photographers were absolutely super, always. Both police and civilian. So I never had to do that, no.
Whenever you say before your time, Tom, you should say even before your time.
even in the dark days. Well, funnily enough, we're going to talk about the world's end, and the opening passage of my book says that it is difficult now, after all these years, to remember all the things we did not know and could not do.
Yeah.
In 1977.
Yeah.
Suffice it to say that we started with paper and pencil, literally, notebook and pencil, fingerprints and crime scene photography, and we ended my service with DNA and supercomputers, and all that was in between.
Yes.
So,
It's been a real learning curve, hasn't it? Which brings us on to our next episode that we did, and we called it Tunnel Vision. But I think, Tom, we'll leave that for now. Continue that for our last episode, because obviously we've got a live gig on Sunday, and you need your beauty sleep more than most. So I'm going to go up the Wooden Hill and get some shut-eye, and we'll carry this conversation on and finish off the rest of the reprise of Season 2 the next time I see you.